Resuming debate, the honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to congratulate the honourable member for Burnaby South on bringing forward Bill C-237, the Canada Gender Equality Act, and initiating a very important conversation about how to achieve gender parity in politics in Canada. Having spent much of my professional career working with women around the world, I have studied best practices in how to increase women's representation in parliaments. Legislative solutions, such as those outlined in Bill C-237, including financial incentives or penalties to encourage political parties to nominate more women, are considered by UN Women, UNDP, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and other major international organizations to be commonly recognized methods to achieve greater gender parity. In fact, I facilitated an international roundtable in Oslo on financing rules for women in politics in 2009, and this was one of the key recommendations. Many countries around the world are going much further than this bill in their legislative frameworks. Today, Canada ranks 61st in the world when it comes to women in Parliament. We rank behind countries like Sudan, Iraq, and Cuba. In virtually every case where countries have achieved gender parity in Parliament, it has been done using mandatory legislated measures, regardless of the electoral system. In Canada, at the current rate, even with party leaders who have a strong commitment to electing more women, we will not achieve parity for another 90 years unless we make some changes, which in my view cannot be left solely to the goodwill of political parties.
I am proud to rise and speak here in Parliament with men and women who are fighting for gender equality. There are more women in this Parliament than in any previous Parliament. We have a cabinet which is unprecedented in its composition and which represents all Canadians. The political parties have undertaken new measures to encourage more women to run as candidates, and many of those who were elected worked very hard to establish new networks and support systems. But as a nation, we are not a leader, and we cannot trust that the situation will fix itself, or trust that the right hand will always be on the tiller.
Never held more than 26% of the seats in this House. We have not seen a dramatic increase in representation since 1993. It is true that we have seen progress, but we cannot just assume that progress will be inevitable. If we choose to settle for the incremental, then we risk losing everything we have accomplished. Globally, in the period following the 1995 Beijing Declaration, there were significant increases in women's representation, largely as a result of the introduction of quotas and other temporary special measures in many countries. But since 2010, many countries have reached a plateau between 25 and 30%, and in some regions, they've even regressed. Canada is falling further and further behind as countries outside of Europe and North America begin to advance beyond the 30% mark. Confronting inequality demands the deployment of unequal measures. As a demographic, women in Canada continue to become highly educated and still continue to make only 73 cents for every dollar that men make. Women in Canada have less access to money networks from which to fundraise for political campaigns, but studies have found that elected women in Canada outspend their male opponents by about 10%. This means that women in Canada need to work harder and spend more money than men to achieve the same results. Financial incentives to political parties for nominating more women would only be rectifying an existing imbalance. This is the reason why, in 2003, under the Chrétien government, the Liberal Women's Caucus was so active in ensuring that nomination contests were included in the spending limits and disclosure requirements of the 2003 electoral financing legislation.
I am proud of the historic and permanent commitment of our government to present bills and laws that have had a tangible impact on electing women. The importance of the Electoral Financing Act of 2003 cannot be overestimated. In the last election, 29.7% of candidates were women, and these women went on to win 26% of the seats in Parliament. Studies undertaken by Equal Voice have indicated that when women are on the ballot, they are elected almost 50% of the time. The Canadian public are not gatekeepers. The problem is getting onto the ballot in the first place. And it's not at the electoral level that women must face the greatest inequality. Women have to face unique financial restrictions and have a lack of access to informal political networks. Despite all of the proof to the contrary, they must face preconceptions, and they have to deal with a political culture that is still very masculine.
C-237 does not propose a solution to all of these problems. It is not all-encompassing. In fact, it is by necessity minimalist in its scope, but it does initiate an important conversation. And it would be a true disservice for us to allow that conversation to end without being studied in committee. As I have traveled the globe talking to women on 5 continents, managing a network with staff spread over 8 countries, the barriers faced by women were the same, differing only in degree. Women, even in Canada, still carry a larger responsibility for caregiving than their male counterparts. That is why the Procedure and House Affairs Committee is studying how to make Parliament more family-friendly. We have heard from several witnesses who have indicated that measures such as more efficient work schedules, better childcare facilities, and reducing heckling would lead to more women on the ballot. Women still face stereotypes and biases in the media that men don't face. And female leadership characteristics are not given the same weight as male leadership styles. Part of this is because of the lack of strong female role models in powerful positions, something that is finally starting to change now that the Prime Minister has appointed a gender-equal cabinet.
Hear, hear.
Recruitment and training are essential for women in politics, and several parties have implemented measures to ensure that women are being recruited, including mandating that women be included in the candidate search committees or refusing to allow a local association to hold a candidate selection meeting unless there are women on the ballot. Many parties also have specific funds to raise money for women candidates.
The electoral system is also a major obstacle to seeing more women elected. The 10 countries in the world with the lowest number of elected members who are women are all countries that use the first-past-the-post system. As we consult on modifying the electoral system in Canada, this point must be taken into consideration.
All the other reforms that can improve women's representation, the evidence continues to show that regardless of the type of electoral system, there are limits to the effectiveness of voluntary measures by political parties. The most common argument against mandatory legislative solutions is autonomy of political parties, but the overwhelming evidence goes against this. Sweden is the only country I am aware of that has achieved parity by relying on voluntary measures. And in that case, the parties have willingly adopted a zipper system where every second candidate must be a woman, something that is not possible under our current electoral system.
This bill would not put Canada right at the head of the line. However, it is a good catch-up measure. Financial incentives are one of the least intrusive measures that can be used to achieve political equality. It would maintain the liberty of political parties in choosing their candidates and their nominations.
More than a matter of justice or optics. Equal political participation is a precondition for policy and principles that are truly democratic and inclusive. This is not a matter of symbolism. I have seen women the world over risking their own person, their own families, their own bodies to take their place at the table. And I've personally experienced what a difference it makes having women in the room. Different experiences, different perspectives must have a voice at the table or they will not be represented. I believe that Bill C-237 is a positive contribution to the ongoing dialogue that will lead to a future where women's voices will be equal to men's in this House and in the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable